Good morning and welcome everybody back to our sphere painting class. If you are joining us for the first time, welcome. We're happy to have you here. If you are new to our online class, we started giving away free gifts. And so if you missed yesterday's class, no worries. I have a free gift for you. It's a lesson plan that you can download. You can use that QR code or use the email or URL at the bottom, and it will allow you to download a free lesson plan from the School of Atelier Arts that teaches you how to key your values in a portrait. So we've been working a lot with values in our sphere painting. So if you missed this free gift yesterday, here you are. Welcome to our class. Okay, I'll leave that up for just a minute. And okay. Excuse me. Okay, so good to see everybody. Good morning, Peter. Good morning, Ellen. So happy to have you here. I love this little morning ritual of, all the students gathering, getting ready for another day of painting en grisaille, right? So en grisaille, as we all know now, I hope, is painting in black and white. And a lot of people may be looking at the sphere being like, oh, good, you did it, Mandy. Yay, carry on, right? But the difference between a sphere and an atelier sphere is a degree of sophistication and refinement. And that's what I hope to teach you in this last bit. I don't know if it's somebody specifically who said this or it's just kind of entered the common lexicon, but the last 10% is 80% of the work or something like that, right? So you can get to this part and feel really good and it's a big accomplishment. But taking that last 10% all the way to the finish, that's actually way more work than even getting to this part. And that's the part that we're in. So it's going to be a little slower, but hopefully we're going to learn to train our eyes just a little bit better. Good morning, Lisa. Good morning, Magritte. Excellent. Yes, Peter, unfortunately, I still have this cough. I just can't shake it. Somehow I think it's getting worse. Like yesterday afternoon, I was like going downhill, but I went to the doctor and they're just like, well, the colds are lasting forever now. So great news for everybody. But maybe next week will be my week. Good morning, Lisa. There's more than one Lisa in the chat for those of you seeing this later. Yeah, it's definitely been going around. Okay, so essentially what we're going to be doing today is continuing our past. Now, yesterday, we lightened this triangle shape worth of our sphere, right? And it's not a big difference. If you're just looking with like big open eyes, you might not even see it. But when you do that squint, you should hopefully notice that we've lightened, this area. But it's only like a half a step, really, if that, right? It's not a big change, but we need to continue lightening our sphere. The reason we were lightening the sphere is because our sphere was looking a little bit dirty, which means that the values were reading as if the sphere was a light gray instead of pure white. And so by doing this technique called spreading our light, where we're actually starting from the light side now and working towards our shadow, it helps us kind of ooze that light over our form and make the sphere start feeling white again. Now, we only did a small section yesterday. My hope is by the end of today, it really starts feeling white for you because we're doing subtle changes. Subtlety is now the name of the game. That's the game we're playing. We started by tracing a circle and now we are in subtle territory here. Okay, so I'm just gonna have at it. I'm trying to decide which section I want to work on today. I'm going to work on this top section here. So I'm going to be it's already naturally making a little bit of a triangle because this stretch was a little bit lighter anyways. So I'm going to work from here to here, this kind of triangle shape in here. And again, we're not going crazy light. It still has to get darker as it reaches around the sphere. It's just our light needs to last a little bit longer before it starts turning into that core shadow. All right. This is the part of a drawing or a painting that's commonly referred to as rendering. And it's kind of an area where if you decide what you're doing ahead of time, that you can zone out a little bit more because what you're doing is just lightening every tile. We have this reference underneath it, and so it doesn't require quite as much thinking as it does when we're excuse me, when we're first laying it down. Um, I'm glad this cold is going to be immortalized forever on YouTube. So it's not going to take us quite as long. So people, when they get to rendering, they'll often listen to an audio book or things like that. I don't have a ton of new information for you, other than we're just lightening everything a little bit as we go. That's essentially the task at hand here. My paint is a couple days old. I mixed up this string on Monday. It's starting to get a little tacky on the dark side, but we're mostly using the lights, and the lights, because it's titanium white. Titanium white stays open, it stays wet, in workable a lot longer than many other colors available on our palettes. So, my light areas are fine for working with. Okay, and again, I'm starting in the lightest bit of my sphere. The more we build up the lights in our sphere, the brighter they'll start feeling. All right, even that one little stroke, I hope that you can see. Sometimes it's not as easy to see on the screen as it is. I'm going to rotate this around just so you guys have the better view to tuck you in nice and close. Okay, so again, I'm working on this triangle area, but I'm starting from my lights, and I'm just, oh, I had a dirty brush there. It's going to take me a couple adjustment strokes here. Part of what's happening is that my pile of white has a lot of dirt in it, and it might be time that I need to add a fresh pile of white. Um, there we go. And again, I'm trying to work across the form in all directions. Every piece of this, every tile should be its own unique value. Remember that we're not smudging in circles because this part of our sphere, it takes longer to get to the light than this part of our sphere. That means it needs to be darker for longer. And if we start smearing it around, it's going to start making this value and this value the same. And that's not what we want. So I'm just spreading the light. I'm making smaller increments of change from my light towards my shadow, and then the rate of change is going to pick up. Ooh, not quite that fast. Ouch. Still a little bit fast of a change. So each tile's a little bit lighter than what was underneath it, but we still have to get all the way to our core shadow color, right? So we still, even though we're staying in light a little bit longer, we still have to make the trek all the way across our values to this darker color. Okay, so we've made it to the core shadow. That's a big jump right there at the end. I don't want quite so big of a jump. Okay, so we've made it all the way into our core shadow. We agreed yesterday that our core shadow was just a touch on the dark side, so I'm going to lighten the core shadow slightly. And then I'm starting to lose this edge on the side, so I'm going to reinstate with my small brush carefully this edge of the sphere. We never want to be in doubt of where the edge of the sphere is. Now, eventually, not all this is going to have to be a sharp edge, but we're keeping it sharp while we work on the sphere part so that we don't lose the shape. The most important thing, especially if this is your first sphere, is to maintain the shape. It's so hard to find it back once you've lost it. Okay. Now, this whole thing needs some work and attention, but we have a lot to talk about there. And I don't want to be jumping around. We're working on the tiling part today, and that's what we want to stay focused on. Now, I did this strip right here, but there's a, like this strip isn't quite leaning into this strip, and there's like 2 or 3 tiles there that just need to transition from this strip to this strip. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to put a tile here, here, and here to finish that transition. All right, I'm just going to check the chat here. It still seems to me that since you have a very limited number of steps, there will be many tiles with the same color. So they are equidistant from the light source, so they are connectable ellipse. So I know, Peter, we've been going back and forth on this, but even if we have the ellipse here around, like if we're looking at this ring, this side is still going to be lighter than this side because this side is still closer to the light source because the sphere is turning away at different rates from the light. So it does affect. Sometimes I talk about believing in fairies when we're, learning atelier painting, and sometimes you just have to believe in the fairy and like believe what I'm telling you, even if you don't think it could be true, because then sometimes you'll see it, and sometimes you just have to go through the entire process to see it. It's not that there won't ever be a similar color in one place and another place, but it's not, the colors aren't aligned on an ellipse around the highlight because this part is further away. The rate of change of that curvature is different here than it is there. All right, so I'm going to just fix these 3 tiles or so that we talked about. And I'm not sure if this is what Peter was mentioning too, but on my gradient here, do you see how I'm mixing in between my tiles? So I'm not just using 1 through 9, I'm using 3.5 and 4 1/4, right? It's basically making a gradient across my palette. No problem, Peter. I appreciate that you are working to understand something that doesn't quite make sense to you yet, which is totally valid and really brave. So I commend you for seeking clarity and understanding. I think I think the best way to learn this particular thing is to go through the process of tiling, and I think it'll make more sense. Um, All right. Now, when I'm not on a strip here, so I'm making a wild guess, which means it's probably going to be off and take a little correction. But I have these 2 to 3 spots here that are really affecting how that line I just did is connecting to what I did yesterday. So, so I'm going to put an idea down. And I'm actually not sad about that idea. Usually, when you make a blind guess, it is problematic. And the same over here. So that's a little dark, a touch lighter. You know how we talked about getting lost in places, right? When you start hopping around, like I'm hopping around right now, it's easy to start getting lost. So you have to be really specific in your visual memory of where you are, what you're doing, and why you're doing it. It's a little dark. All right, and there's one more spot right there that's bothering me. Now, in our final pass, for those of you who aren't aware, this is not our final pass. On our final pass, we're going to be doing things like adjusting little spots, right, and creating a really smooth transition. But we need the underlying form to be working for us before we can do that, right? And so right now that means lightening our sphere. Once we lighten the sphere, we're going to correct the shadow side, and then we'll do a final refined rendering pass on the sphere. So Magritte, this is a second pass. So we did one whole pass underneath. This is the second pass where we're kind of lightening. We decided it was too dark. And then the third pass will be a super refined rendering pass that's going to take all these little bumps away, these bumps that bother us when we are tiling. We're going to, use a technique to basically be mindful about filling in any of these spots that are out of order. But if we start hopping now, we're going to get lost. What especially tends to happen on a second pass is that people are like, oh, I need to lighten it. And they put a whole bunch of white here and then they start smudging it around the highlight, and you will lose all your beautiful work that way. So try to stay disciplined. This can be frustrating. This requires a lot of visual memory to remember where you are, right? And you will get lost, especially if this is your first time trying this technique. You haven't developed your visual memory for tiling yet. So, it's one of those things that I don't know, that's really awkward to do the first couple times, but then becomes second nature to you once you've practiced it. Um, but it can be painful. People either love or hate tiling, and it kind of depends on your personality a little bit. Like I find that my more like exacting students like tiling, like they pick it up, or they like that technique, and that my students that are like big idea, big impression people find it painful to to learn tiling. But there's lots of techniques in the atelier to learn, and some ateliers don't teach tiling at all, but I found that it's the best way to learn and understand form and to see small increments of change. Um, so this is called form painting. Tiling is a type of form painting. There's also a type of painting that's called impression painting. And that's when you're like basically trying to get the big impression all the time and you're less concerned about modeling the forms. Impression painters tend to think that form painters over model forms, and form painters tend to think that impression painters flatten too much. Right? So I'm not saying that one's better than another. We'll certainly cover both techniques, and you can see why sometimes you have to choose one or the other depending on what you're going for in a painting. But I really believe in having the most techniques possible in your tool bag so that you always can create the impression that you intend to create, right? Whether if you want something to feel really, really rounded, you'll know how to do that. If you want something to have like a really formal, big impression, you'll be able to do that, but you won't not be able to do the thing you intend to do because you didn't have the skill to do it. So that's my whole shtick. That's the whole School of Atelier Arts thing, is like, we give you the tools you need to create the art you want. Okay, I'm seeing some questions. Um, so just a reminder, yesterday I had painted this triangle of the sphere, and today I'm continuing lightening this top part of the sphere. Peter's saying, I appreciate it, but I do find it painful. I'm definitely an impression painter, but I may use it in small doses. Even impression painters, really common that you'll see it in a vase, right? So you'll have this impression approach to florals in a vase, for example, but then the vase will use some form painting to really round it out. Emil Carlson did that a lot. So he would use more of an impression approach, and then on certain forms, he would really do form painting. So Ellen saying it would be hard to think, going to fix some more gray tiles now. Yeah. I mean, you can see my outfit is continuing to go grisaille, right? Like I started out wearing colors, right? And we're 3 weeks in, because what I've been feeding my eye for the last 3 weeks is this grisaille, and it affects you. Um, but it's one of these things that if you go through the process, even if it hurts, your eye will see better by the end of it because there's no way you can even get a first pass, let alone a second pass down without really challenging what you're seeing and small increments of change and your visual memory between your palette and your painting. So I hope that's an inspirational last thought and not a depressing one. uh, so Ellen's saying, I'm going to try to leave it on another easel, come and go. I want to do it and it seems so helpful. Yeah, it definitely is. And it's not something that you have to do all at once, right? So if you find yourself losing your patience, like making a lot of mistakes, walk away, come back the next day. If you find it super painful, just, excuse me, do like 10 minutes a day, right? Like just do enough until you start getting lost in your head and stop. What happens is when people start getting lost in their head, they start doing the smeary thing. Okay. So, um, do just enough where you're feeling challenged, but not going to do silly things like smear your paint around and just pick away at it over time. Absolutely. Okay. So, I'm just going to do this last little triangle here. It's unclear to me if this side of my sphere also needs lightened, but I think if I finish this one little bit here, it'll inform if anything needs to be done on this side. Okay. So I'm just making a guess. See how bright that is? That was not the right guess. It looks like somebody, put a ding in my sphere. So as long as I don't panic, I'm going to be okay. I just need to make the adjustment. No panicking. I am new to watching the Star Trek shows, and I don't know how many Trekkies are here, but I've never seen them, and I'm watching my very first one with some friends who are like, "I can't believe you don't know what this is." And one thing that I'm constantly amazed by in the show is that they're about to die at all times, and everybody's just staying so calm, right? They're like, "Oh yeah, this super torpedo is about to destroy the ship and everybody on it and everything we've worked for and our entire culture is under threat." And they're just calmly being like, "Tuvok, do this." Like, right? And that's the mentality. You need a Vulcan mentality. Is it the Vulcans, the ones that are, see, I'm still learning. You need that mentality of calm and logic when you're approaching this because, I just put another tile out of place and, just got to stay calm, no panicking. Pretend you're on the starship. All right. That's too big of a jump. Let's find the one in between. That's too light. The other thing that's happening, do you see how as I'm adjusting this tile is getting bigger and bigger and bigger? So instead of adjusting the entire tile, I'm just going to try to find the pieces in between because I don't want to get to the point where I'm suddenly smearing all the way around. So Ellen's relating to only have seen a few. I haven't seen very many at all. I'm just like, how are they so calm? But I'm going to tell my friends that in my teaching today that I used a Star Trek analogy and hope they'll be proud of me. Oh, that's too light again. Okay. So we're slowly fixing that whole debacle. This is still a little light here. You just stay in the spot until it's right. You don't go on, you don't give up, you don't smear things around, you just carry on until you get it. That's all. All right. So I'm thinking that's feeling better. I'm going to stand back. Sometimes standing back helps you figure things out. That's feeling overall a little better. Um, okay, and I'm just going to extend, I'm just going to try to finish this little triangle shape here. Too light. Peter is an OG Star Trek watcher. You know, I've always been a nerd, but I never like my nerd credentials are lacking, right? Because I was an art nerd, right? So like I wasn't the sci-fi nerd, I wasn't the video game nerd. And so my nerd credentials are also always being questioned. So I'm trying to catch up and become a more well-rounded nerd. I keep leaning really high on the higher key part of my palette. Um, Remember that we want the sphere to be reading white overall. Um, so that's a different problem than if the local color of the sphere were darker. Um, that was a bit of an abrupt transition. You can see me making more guesses because we're trying to respect what we painted underneath it while transitioning and shifting it one way or the other, right? Now, again, I need to be careful as I approach. Another thing that tends to happen when you're doing passes is, do you see how I brought that dark in? It's really easy to start making the inside feel wobbly. We need to keep this core shadow shape in mind while we make these adjustments. Oh, and I came very close to losing that edge here. Okay, I don't want to fuss with the core shadow too much, but I do need to make sure that it's maintaining its shape. I see a really big jump between this value and that value that I want to try to adjust here. Now I'm trying not to get sucked in, but um, by sucked in, I mean doing things out of order. What I really need to do is go back and start on this triangle shape here instead of getting sucked into what's happening here. Okay. Once, we reestablish the values that we actually want, it'll be time for a finishing pass. But right now, because we're doing the second pass, there's these little darks that are sticking out at me, and I'm like, oh, I just want to adjust them, but this isn't the time for that. Let me finish this little triangle shape here. Basically, this little piece that's left will connect what's there to the adjustments we just made. And I need to be careful. My tiles are getting big because I'm trying to fill in this little triangle space. Again, just anytime you see a problem with the circle, it's worth adjusting. Okay, it looks like this one tile is too dark right there. We're getting there. Oof, that was too dark. All right, so this is the slower part. We're not making tons and tons of progress at a time. We're just being deliberate. Um, oh, yes. Okay, my light changed. Peter's pointing out that I'm casting a shadow on here. I forgot to put up my screen this morning, and our light just shifted on us. So let me throw up those screens. So in my studio, this is a new studio space, and what's happening is that I have my north-facing light coming from this direction, and I have kind of a corner in the studio that gets really bright light this time of day. And what's happening is that the wall opposite of me is receiving this blast of light, and this is reflected light. This cast shadow is being created by reflected light off of a light-colored wall on the opposite side. So what's the solution? I can put screens up, I can put curtains up to diffuse or block that light, or because this is a bouncing light, if I painted that wall a really dark color, that would likely also solve the problem of this light getting into my studio space. So let's make some screen adjustments. All right, and we're still getting a touch. It's really blasting in here today, but I think that'll largely solve our problem. We're kind of in hypothetical mode, right? Like we are trying to use observation, but we are also using what we know must be true about the form that we're painting. Okay, so my question to myself now is, am I happy with the value of this part of the sphere? Because I lightened this and then I connected it here. Does any of that need to be lighter? And I see a couple places that maybe could be a touch lighter, but I feel like I can do that on the finishing pass. I feel like overall, this is connecting. There's kind of a point. Do you guys see this? It's kind of creating a cone head point here. And it's because there's a little bit too much light on this edge here. So I'm going to very, very carefully, the slightest amount, darken that edge to get rid of this point. If you don't see the point, squint your eyes. And then as I make this adjustment, see what a difference it makes. I'm literally just going to drop this value on the edge here, the tiniest bit. And that's too light. Touch darker. All right, and it needs to go just a touch darker. Now, part of what's happening here is that the value is very briefly matching the background color. And so that's creating some challenge for us to maintain the shape of this. All right, do you see how we're working on getting rid of this cone head effect? Oh, I just went outside. So now I need to come back in with that darker color because I disrupted. I hope you guys can't hear my stomach rumbling because it's being really loud. Just like a physical disaster today. And then okay. All right. So do you see how we got rid of that point that was happening, that light point, that visual light point? Okay. Oh, all right. So I'm trying to think. There's this other big triangle. Do you see how we started by just lightening this triangle, then we lightened this triangle, and it just happened to connect with what we had over here? And do you see how the same thing's going to kind of happen? Do you see that this is just a slightly darker triangle here? And that if I just lighten this triangle, there won't be this division between this pass and that pass here? So sometimes your painting tells you when you're on the right track. Now, it does feel like there's a little triangle right here that the first few steps could be a little lighter. Like, do you see how it's kind of making a pie slice in here? So actually, you know what? I'm going to do this triangle first because I only need a couple values to knit this to that. And then I think that's what we'll get done today, doing this little bit. And then tomorrow we'll finish the second pass here, and maybe we'll have time tomorrow to start making adjustments on our shadow side. Okay. All right, so I'm just going to fix this little pass, but don't ever get it in your head, oh, I'm just going to do this quick little thing. It never works that way. Never, ever actually works that way. You have to be just as methodical on this pass as you were when you laid your first pass down. My stomach is ridiculous. I need to put it on thicker here because it's not reading as bright. Because remember, we built up the layers on the other part of our sphere. And so by having not built up the layer over here, it wasn't reading as light as I wanted it to read. Try not to lose your patience on this pass. I'm like, oh, it's just a little triangle. I can smudge it around, right? I get tempted too, as much as I've been admonishing all of you, don't do that thing. It's really tempting for me to just paint it in, but it's not the same. And if I treat it the same, I'm going to lose a lot of the beauty of the piece. That's going to be too dark. So it doesn't really take all that much um, to spread the light on this side of the sphere, right? Because it's so much brighter than the other side of the sphere. Oh my goodness. All right. So I'm just trying to knit what I have on there with this lighter pass. Okay. Overall, that's feeling okay. This one stroke there is a little bit on the light side, and it's really messing with my form. And so normally I would let it be, but this one's just really sticking in my craw. There we go. Okay, there's some work to do on the next pass there, but overall, do you see how we made like 5 tiles a half step lighter, and do you see how our light is starting to ooze? We're starting to get this really beautiful form with our sphere, and by the time we finish this last triangle here, it's going to really make a difference. I'm tempted to start this triangle, but I know I can't finish it in time, and I don't want to rush, so I'm debating about what I want to do. I think I'll just do one pass at a time. One thing at a time. So I'll do this one here. I'm building up the lights. You know what? I need to stop. I'm making some bad choices right now. Let me fix this last tile, and we'll work on this triangle bit tomorrow. Today's not the day. There's too many other things going on. My eyes are burnt out a little bit. Tiling is hard. All the things, right? And yay, Ellen can see the difference, and Magritte's saying that she can see it all emerge too, right? So it's one of those things that it's hard to believe until you see it, and it's even harder to believe until you do it, right? So I definitely encourage everybody, do this as well as you can. If you can't do it in paint, you can do it in pencil, right? It's just values, and it doesn't matter whether it's paint or, a sketching pencil. The key is learning to control your values. Peter's saying that I'd be so tempted at this point to paint the dark side of the moon. Yes, I know. It's so tempting to just throw in here, right? But the reason I'm withholding here is there's actually two reasons. One is that we aren't going to know what this value's final landing place is until we finish brightening the sphere. It's going to look very different by the time we finish this last triangle than it does right now, and it's going to affect how we see this over here. And then the other reason is that there is an issue with our background, right? Because the background is actually darker than the dark side of our sphere. And if I darken this side of the sphere, it's going to be darker. I'm going to show you. Do you see the background is darker? So if I want to darken this and maintain the relationship correctly between the background, the light of the sphere, and the shadow of the sphere, I need to darken my background about half a step, right? Because the background is darker than the shadow side of my sphere. And that's what really starts messing students up, right? Is they're like, oh, this is lighter than that, and that's darker than that, because they're not thinking holistically about the whole thing, right? So it's so easy to be like, okay, I want to darken this, but all of a sudden it messes up your relationship with the background, right? So you can never just arbitrarily go in and be like, oh, that looks too light, blah, 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 blah. Look at it within the context of the whole. Okay. So thank you, everybody, for being here today. Please make sure to join our mailing list. All of the best stuff comes through our mailing list. You can sign up at schoolofatelierarts.com. We have wonderful worksheets to help you practice the techniques and skills that we teach in these classes. And I will one more time, I have a free gift for you. So I'm going to just stick it back up here in case you missed it earlier in the show. But you can download this free lesson plan, and keying values. In this case, they're doing it in the portrait, but keying values is exactly what we're going to be talking about on this sphere, because we have to key the background to the light of the sphere to the shadow of the sphere. And so this lesson really covers that concept in depth, and I encourage you to check it out. Okay. All right. So thank you, everybody, for coming today. As always, it was delightful to see all of you, and I look forward to seeing you tomorrow. All right. Take care, everybody.